You're listening to the Loida Lewis Podcast, hosted by Loida Nicholas Lewis. She's a trailblazing businesswoman, leader, philanthropist, and the widow of Reginald F. Lewis, the visionary leader who was the first African-American to build $1 billion company. With unparalleled determination, Loida Lewis has not only excelled as a successful attorney, but also shaped a billion-dollar empire. Following the untimely passing of her husband, Reginald F. Lewis, she took the helm of TLC Beatrice, carving her legacy as a successful business leader. Be inspired and learn from her as she shares her wisdom, the secrets to her success in both business, in love, and in life. Let's live, love, laugh, and learn. With your host, Miss Loida Lewis.
Welcome to the Loida Lewis Podcast. And today, I have the honor of presenting to you Sandro Roco, the founder and CEO of a new drink, non-alcoholic, that's called Sanzo. So here he is. Thank you. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much
Sandro.
for having me. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yes. Well, the first thing is, Sanzo, how did you come with that name? Because your name is Sandro Roco.
Yes.
And it's too far from Sandro Roco.
It's a little far from that, but my middle name is Lorenzo. And so it's a funny story when you're coming up with a brand. A lot of the desirable names you would want are actually trademarked. So Sanzo is actually about like the 12th idea that I had, and it came at a time when I was really struggling to come up with a name that I thought would be a good one. And so what I ended up doing was, for whatever reason, just because I was looking for some creative inspiration, I wrote down all of the letters of my first, middle, and last names, Alessandro, Lorenzo, Rocco, and just started rearranging them. And then one of the iterations was Sanzo, and I was like, all right, this is good enough. We could change. We could change it down the line if we want to, but this at least gets me to a good place to get started. And that was at this point a little over 5.5 years ago. And so, 5.5 years later, here we are still living with the name.
Sanzo, yeah, no, it's great. Aside from in the Philippines, there's a very famous, or even in the United States, a famous Filipino-born artist, Sanzo.
I've heard.
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. So, can you explain to the audience what is this drink? I know it's non-alcoholic.
Yes.
But what is it?
Sure. So the long and short of it is, Sanzo is a modern beverage utilizing traditional Asian flavors. What we saw in the market was a really growing part of the market that was really interested in new age, modern, better for you, cleaner beverages that were removing a lot of the sugar and high fructose corn syrup and artificial flavors and additives that you would find in, the large conglomerates like Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And also, it was coming at a time, like I said, about 5.5 years ago, when I was seeing really the rise of Asian and Asian American culture in the United States. Crazy Rich Asians was the #1 film at the box office. Korean pop music was, really starting to take off. BTS was on their first nationwide tour, and they were literally selling out football stadiums across the United States. And, I was really captured by that. I'd never seen, I'd grown up, my parents immigrated in the 1980s, was born and raised in central New Jersey. And in many ways, I can't say I was necessarily, I can honestly not say that I was necessarily felt ostracized for being Asian, but I didn't necessarily feel like, oh, it's something that I should necessarily be proud of. But, those are kind of seminal moments for me to see our culture in really prominent places. And I felt like, hey, is there an opportunity here? It's kind of further that conversation. And when I started going to grocery stores, I'm really into food and drink, what I felt like there was a real disconnect. What I was seeing on the silver screen or what I was listening to on my Spotify wasn't matching what I was seeing in the grocery stores. And I felt like, hey, for food and beverage is such a great way for folks to connect. Here's an opportunity where we can maybe serve as that bridge of, among cultures. So that was really the inspiration for, getting into it. I'm New York City based. And so you just kind of started tinkering around in my kitchen, and just got started that way.
Wow, terrific. So did you hear that? It has less sugar
Less sugar
than what you drink.
and made with real fruit.
And made from fruits.
Yes.
Basically, so no additives like, other things that are chemical.
Exactly. Chemicals, just bad things that your body doesn't like. We've removed that.
Okay, so that's Sanzo, Sanzo. Listen well. But before that, you said something like your parents immigrated from the Philippines.
Yes.
Yes? So your parents came here in the 1980s?
Yes.
Okay, that is right after 86 was lifting of martial law.
Yes.
So they came right after that.
Right. Yes.
Okay, and tell me about your parents.
Sure. So they're both born and raised in the Philippines. They met in their first year of college. They both went to Ateneo de Manila University. It was actually
That's a Jesuit school, very well known in the Philippines, Ateneo de Manila University.
Yes, and it was actually, I believe, the first year that Ateneo went co-ed. So that they wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet otherwise if not for that. And so they met then. It's funny. I should probably ask them more stories about when they dated.
You should. Yes.
But most of, I guess it's funny how we think about our parents. I only really know them as my parents, not so much as real people,
as human beings.
But they had my two older brothers while in Manila, but then decided basically that there would be a better life in the United States. So they came. They immigrated here in the mid 1980s. Right after that, I was born here in Flushing, and then we moved to central New Jersey, where that's pretty much all of the memories that I have of growing up.
Yes, so natural born, you can be president of the United States, right? Okay, so tell us about growing up in New Jersey.
Yeah, so I lived in a town where I felt like I almost call it like at least for me, looking back, kind of like an idyllic upbringing of, I don't know, a mishmashing of American culture. We were, one of the first Asian and definitely one of the first Filipino families in the town. But it was a town called Sayreville, right dab smack in the middle. If you believe in the idea that Central Jersey exists, Sayreville would be pretty close to the center. Of Central New Jersey, and it was great because I grew up in a very ethnically diverse area. My friends growing up were across the entire spectrum. And I felt like, I obviously didn't appreciate it at the time, or can really only appreciate it now. But that plus my parents, the way that they wanted to teach us about American culture and the way that I was introduced to a lot of folks was really through food. So our town specifically was heavily Italian American, Polish American, and Irish American. But all the towns over were heavily Latino, Black, and then 20 minutes down the way was a town called Edison, which is a huge Asian diaspora. So growing up, every weekend had the ability to be exposed to pretty much every kind of cuisine you can imagine. And if you look at pictures of me from when I was 12. I actually don't weigh that much more now than I did when I was 12. So I really love to eat from an early age, and that's how I learned a lot about culture. And my parents, well, I would say they fed that to me in more ways than one. They both fed me well, and then also fed into that desire to learn about cultures through food.
Okay, so who did the cooking in your household as you were growing up?
Well, what was great was both my parents could cook very well. Predominantly, it was my mom, but my dad would, hop in there too, and it was great to see that it was. I think it was also a great example of, hey, cooking is not necessarily a gender-specific thing. It can be, it can be whoever wants to.
Yes, so you have more or less a pretty well-adjusted childhood growing up.
I think so.
In the sense that in the sense that there was no you're the wife, so you do all this. So they both help together.
Yes.
And the city where you grew up in, you were not the only Asian.
That's
you were
correct.
not the only person of color.
Right.
Right. So you didn't have that kind of, I'm the only one, I have to fit in.
Yeah, it was. I think in many ways it was both a pro and a con. I mean, we were both, because I've seen this also with fellow Asian Americans in in areas of the country where they're actually the majority, such as in Southern California, like the San Gabriel Valley, or even in like Flushing or Jersey City, where in some ways there's such a built-in like pride and sense of gathering. And for me, for better or worse, I just kind of existed. So it actually took me until I was much older to even start asking myself or wondering like, oh, hey, like,
I'm Asian.
Like being
I'm Filipino.
is something that I should be like really, really proud of. And in many ways, I'm sure my parents tried, and me at least being a boy or just in general being not open to the conversation, it took me until a little bit older until to really realize and appreciate my Filipino heritage.
Yes. So in a way, you're growing up American. In a way.
In a way, yes. Yes.
So what was your ambition? What did you take after high school, public school?
I went to a Catholic high school.
Catholic high school.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I had really
from your parents being from Ateneo, which is a Catholic Jesuit school.
Yes. And I'll say my interest. This is where I guess I went a little bit off the Jesuit path. Just skewed a little bit better towards science and math, and so I really wanted to go into the world of engineering.
So that's what you took.
That's what I took in college. So my degree is in chemical engineering. I had fantastic chemistry, calculus, and physics teachers. So it just they kind of fed me that path, and it served me well throughout college. And then my first job right out of college was as a nuclear engineer.
Nuclear engineer. Oh my God.
Yeah. So I worked at a
heavy
nuclear
stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I worked at a nuclear power plant for 3 years in the middle of Pennsylvania. So got to learn, a lot about how,
processes, how industry works, processes.
How industry works, and also how literally people keep the lights on. And so that was a very, informative, educational experience. Ultimately, and we can get into it, but ultimately decided that career path wasn't really for me, but did teach me a lot.
Okay. And so when you said 3 years is enough of nuclear engineering, so where did you go?
So then I had the opportunity to move to New York City after those 3 years, and worked for JP Morgan's investment bank, specifically in their credit trading division. So
credit rating.
So basically selling bonds and other instruments related to bonds. And for me, it was very formative because the engineering was a great experience to kind of learn how one particular thing worked. And in this case, it was the energy industry, and particularly, the nuclear power industry. But what I really wanted at the time was to learn a lot more macro how the world worked. And for me, it was a matter of, I want to see how money flows or how capital flows throughout the entire global economy. And so, being able to be in the financial markets was just, an incredible experience.
Learning experience.
Yes.
JP Morgan is one of the biggest banks in the world.
Yes.
Okay, so you were in like Flint in the biggest bank, one of the biggest banks of the world.
Yes.
Okay, so you enjoyed that.
Very much so.
Okay, so did you veer? You didn't stay in JP Morgan, obviously. So did you veer towards something else?
Right. So had a great 2-year stint there, but ultimately, and there's a theme here about being a bit confused in my 20s, or just kind of taking things from certain career experiences, but then ultimately wanting to apply it somewhere else. I loved learning about how, I guess,
money flows,
the system works. But then ultimately what I was yearning for was then, I think the engineering sensibility kicked in, and I was like, hey, I actually want to build. And ultimately it was like, oh, maybe I actually want to learn how to build a business. And so, while during the last, several months, at JP, I was flirting around with a couple of different business ideas, even started a couple as just like proof of concepts, but ultimately found, hey, I might actually be better served by getting some startup experience, working under a founding team that I felt like was smart, intentional, knew what they were doing. And so that was really my first foray into entrepreneurship. So it was actually just about 10 years ago. that I joined the first startup that I was involved in, that was in the apparel industry. And so I would say that's really where things like shifted. That's where I really found, okay, this is where I belong. I love the idea of building businesses. I liked just building.
Starting something.
Yes.
From concept to reality.
Exactly. And then, I was in the fortunate position of being, kind of, I literally sat next to our founder and CEO. And so it was great, got to be in a support function for him. He still today is a mentor and a friend. And so just having that relationship for 5 years was incredible.
Okay, so you're sort of like personal assistant. You did everything that he told you to do.
Yes, exactly.
Right. But in the meantime, you're learning
Yes.
what does creating something and making it real. Yes.
And scaling it.
So is that still alive, successful, the apparel business, that brand?
So back in COVID in 2020, I want to say in 2021, the company was acquired. So they did have an exit. I obviously was not part of it at the time. But it,
You had left by that time.
I had left by that time. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So in a way, you understood how a business can grow.
Yes.
And then maybe had an exit strategy.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Great. So now, how did you come into, that's apparel. This one is drink.
Yes.
So how did you shift? Well, you said a little bit about it.
Yes. So there's a couple things that I found that were applicable. Obviously, there's a lot that's not, but the parts that I found really that were applicable that I kind of enjoyed was the idea of building a brand and what a brand is and how you do it at the earliest stages. So, when I worked at the last company, that was the advent of building brands that were social media leaning and what we call digitally native. And, I learned a lot about at that company that you can build at a minimum 8-figure company, mostly through fantastic social media and social media advertising. And I thought that was pretty awesome. Just, this idea that,
wait, 8-figure means 10 million
10
or
through,
more,
10
80
through 99
to 90 million.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
through social media, meaning Facebook.
Sure. So I would say in the early 2010s, it would have been Facebook. In the late 2010s, I would say Instagram. And then now I would say TikTok. There was a bit of time there when people tried building brands through Twitter and or Snapchat. But I think ultimately it's really become, especially today, it's really become TikTok first. TikTok led is how most new brands are building today. And so I think what I most loved about that idea was that it really democratized entrepreneurship, right? And especially coming from, being a child of immigrants, there's a lot of societal and structural incumbency that immigrants are disadvantaged on. But the power of social media means that, hey, anyone with an interesting message or a brand, or in some cases, especially for folks who are running, let's say, media agencies or things that are where the product is completely digitized, you're starting at the same exact starting line that anyone else would. And I found that to be really, really compelling.
Okay. Did you hear that? Democratizing business.
And entrepreneurship.
Yes. Okay. That's a good word. Remember that. Okay.
And so, that's one thing that that's probably one of the biggest things that made me feel like, hey, there's an opportunity here to at least, if I can deliver the right product and learn about the manufacturing, the operations, the distribution, that we might have a leg up versus a lot of the folks who are out there. But to your point, there's all of those things: operations, manufacturing, distribution. Those are things that I did not know anything about. But fortunately, being in New York City, there's a pretty rich ecosystem of other emerging brand entrepreneurs. And so, had the opportunity. Really what I did was I would walk into a Whole Foods or other like smaller markets, literally grab a can or a bottle of these emerging brands, turn it around, find their Instagram or find their email address, and just directly reach out to them. And oftentimes, especially some of these smaller brands, the folks who are behind the screen, who are on the other side of the Instagram page or the email, it's the founders themselves. And so, especially in the earliest days, I would trade some of the knowledge that I had around how to build a brand through e-commerce that would be my give. And then my get would be, hey, teach me about manufacturing, teach me about distribution, teach me about sales. How can I get into Whole Foods? How can I get into, Stop and Shop or Costco or Target? And so just kind of step by step, day by day, built that knowledge base. And, in many ways, to a degree, it's still what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis to build a brand.
Well, you're your own research and development.
Yes.
Okay, so from nothing, you did all the questioning from your own brain, being an engineer.
Yes.
How did they do this? So it's not like I'm afraid to ask questions. Tanga. I'm meaning to say, that's so stupid to say something, I don't want to ask questions. No, he was asking questions from the beginning of how to get it.
You have to be willing to put yourself out there. It's probably one of the biggest things that I learned in the earliest days was putting yourself out there with a level of humility. I think, your take was like tanga. I would say more, it's like people are, they're maybe a little bit afraid of looking a certain way. They've built themselves, whether it's through their education or other career paths, and you just kind of have to, they're a little afraid to strip that down. And I have found the best entrepreneurs are those who are kind of willing to submit their ego and say, I don't know this, and that's okay. I'm going to try to find people who can give me the answers and try to ask the best possible questions that I can to close that gap.
Okay. Again, guys, all right? Not so much ego. It's being willing to find the answer and not being afraid to say, oh, she doesn't know anything. I tell you, if you ask a question honestly, people will answer.
People will answer.
Like you were able to get the founders themselves. And, because you are honest and you're sincere, they will see it in you.
Absolutely.
All right? So, guys out there, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid, like me, I'm sorry to have said it, to be told tanga or meaning stupid. Okay? It's not a stupid question. Never a stupid question. Okay? So from there on, now tell me, how did you start to qualify, to create in your mind? Okay? And you have found a good name, Sanzo.
Thank you.
All right? And so give us the process.
Sure. So, putting all of those pieces of the puzzle together, was able to find a small manufacturer actually in South Brooklyn. And that was great because living in New York, I wanted to make sure that the people who were producing our product were close by in the early days. So we could just frankly have control over the process, manufacturing, warehousing, distribution. I wanted to know that the product was always close by and available. And really just started out by producing the smallest possible production run that I could. And look,
that you could finance.
That I could finance, right. And I would even say that I could finance and get enough feedback on to validate whether I was on the right path or not. I think that's probably the biggest thing was I wanted to move quickly to get feedback. And so, we did our first production run in April of 2019. And after that, I literally took 3 pallets of product, which I'm trying to think, it's like that for folks that would be, I don't know, if you live in New York City, that'd be, as I experienced, that's about half the size of a studio or a 1-bedroom apartment. Because after the production run, I literally took it and brought it all to my apartment and then just started selling it from there. So I had a website, so I would sell to people on our website, but then I would also...
You mean to say they will order and you will send it?
Yep.
So you are your own fulfillment center.
Correct.
Oh my God.
Yes.
So you have to find the package.
Yes.
The how to send it.
How to wrap it.
How to wrap it. How to go to the post office to mail it.
Yes.
Because you didn't have the UPS yet.
Correct. Nope.
All right. So start from real scratch.
I did. For better or worse. I think there might be now easier ways to get started, but I also honestly I wanted to learn all the pain points because even now, right, like we are a bit larger, but I now know exactly what the pain points are for our for our warehouse, for what we call it a 3PL, a third party logistics provider. And so I would not have gotten that knowledge if I had not done it in the beginning. And similarly, so what I would essentially do is during the day, I would pack my backpack with samples, go all around New York City, up and down the street, selling the product. And then
selling the product to
right. So
bodegas,
Yes. So it was a combination of things. So we would sell it to, bodega and bodega type of stores, but then also Asian American eateries. So actually one of our very first customers, and I'll give her a shout out, Algie Francisco from Cabicera.
Cabicera.
She was one of our very first customers.
Kasi Cabicera is a Filipino restaurant in
The Lower East Side.
Lower East Side, yes.
And it was basically for folks who are, familiar with it, or even if you're not, like, it's a Filipino eatery in the Lower East Side. We were looking for all of those, types of places to sell the drink. And so in the beginning, I would self-distribute the product from my apartment. So Algie would, either call me up or I would call her up. She'd want to place an order. And that day I would deliver the product with an invoice. She would pay me, and on we went. It finally got to a point, fortunately, where we had enough accounts, we had enough business, where it didn't make sense for me to keep doing that. And so I was actually able to take that business and give it to a distributor who could just fulfill all those orders.
It's part of their business to distribute things, not only yours, but other things.
But other things as well.
Right.
So, that's how we got started. Is very, very, very organic.
Very organic. Yes. Learning from A to B to C. Now, the thing is, how did you know what tastes good? I mean, how did you get the tastes?
Right.
What were your first flavors?
Sure. So our first 3 flavors, actually, the very first one we came up with was our calamansi, which is for folks who haven't had it yet. It's it's like a golden lime. It's a mix between a lime and a tangerine. Me being Filipino, it was in many ways the inspiration for starting the brand.
How did you have calamansi here in New Jersey?
We bought it from a supplier in California. Mm-hmm. And we were able to just produce it from there.
So that was your first flavor.
That was our first flavor.
Okay, meaning to say, because you were Asian, you're Filipino, you wanted a drink that was not available with the Coca-Cola or Pepsi.
Right. We wanted to offer a true point of differentiation versus what else was out there. Our first 3 flavors were a calamansi, a lychee, and a mango.
Lychee is Chinese, more or less, lychees.
It's funny. I would say that is where it originated. Although it's funny, whenever I go around, every Asian subculture claims lychee or lychee, however you pronounce it, as their own. So I actually pause when I say that because it does have Chinese origins, but especially to my Indian friends, other Southeast Asian friends, everyone has such pride over that flavor. And and I also say that because it is our number 1 selling flavor, and it's been amazing to see the reception. Both within the Asian community, but also outside of it. I mean, even I have friends from Middle Eastern backgrounds who very much claim have a sense of pride over the lychee flavor. And so it does have Chinese origins, but it's now, I would consider, a truly global mass market flavor.
Wonderful. Okay, so that's the second one.
Yeah.
Okay,
and so you asked about, like, how did we get the taste, the flavor, get it to, people liked it. Honestly, that was through trial and error. When we would produce the product, when we would sell in certain grocery stores, so maybe not so much the cabiceras, but smaller bodegas. I would actually be at the stores pouring samples
and
for people to taste it,
drink.
and then see what people bought and what they gravitated towards. And so, that feedback informed a lot of our formulations, our recipes, and the evolution that we've had there. So. I've learned in the earliest days of beverage, it's a very, very hands-on experience to I think, do it right.
Wonderful. So did you have a taste? I mean, a chemist has to understand how much water and this and that and that. So who were your first hire?
So actually, there's a really great ecosystem of folks who work fractionally or like part-time on a project basis. So the way the process tends to go is, I would kind of cook up something in my kitchen and then send that to the chemist, the food scientist that we would pay, and they would essentially get the recipe or formulation ready for commercial sale. To make sure that, hey, the recipe as is, won't harm anyone, is safe, and obviously tastes good for mass distribution.
Okay. Did you see that? In his kitchen, he was mixing drinks. The calamansi, which is really a drink, it's a fruit that is very common in the Philippines.
Yes.
And now it's grown in California.
Yes.
And that's how you were able to source it.
Yes, originally. Yes.
Originally, right. So now, as you continue to build, how are you getting your product?
The
taste.
The taste. Well, we now work with larger suppliers who bring in our raw materials. We produce the product. I'll say outside of New York City, it would be quite expensive, and there's not enough space to produce at the scale that we're at right now. So we've now moved manufacturing outside, and then really where we've gone with the brand is, hey, we're obviously, like, New York City is our home, and it's it'll always be near and dear to us. But we are now sold nationwide in close to all 50 states.
Wow! Can you imagine that in 5 years?
Yeah.
Wow! Bravo!
Thank you.
Yes, terrific. So, what is your okay, everyone, start buying Sanzo. All right, start buying Sanzo. You can still order it on the computer.
Yes,
I
you
mean,
can.
on the
Yes, the easiest way, if someone is not near a grocery store that immediately has Sanzo, anyone can just order us from Amazon, wherever you are in the country.
Amazon.com. Oh my
Yes.
goodness, you really made use of the internet.
Yes.
Democratization of entrepreneurship.
Yes.
Terrific. Now, my final question is, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
Sure.
Sanzo.
So the main reason I started the brand, and what still very much drives me and has served as a North Star, vision for us, is I look at brands specifically like San Pellegrino and Perrier, both of which are global billion-dollar brands, and from New York to obviously Europe, but even across many parts of Asia, you can find bottles of these two brands there. And what I think they've done and been a part of is really this definition of what aspiration means. You think of Perrier, you think San Pellegrino, you think French culture, Italian culture, and rolling hills of Tuscany, right? Or you think of rolling through the streets of Paris, and that's fantastic. I mean, I dream of those things. I love those things. I think those are fantastic. But the reason why I started the brand was I wanted people to also have a certain type of aspiration around Asian and Asian American culture. I felt like if you could build that, and what you really instill is a level of pride, both within Asian American communities and also outside of it, right? And I think you're actually seeing that already, which is great, right? Across other parts of pop culture. I'm in the fortunate position of being able to travel the country, to distribute Sanzo, to sell Sanzo, and seeing the opening of new sushi restaurants, or specifically there's a lot of new Korean inspired restaurants that are out there, and really I call it bridging cultures, bringing things that have been near and dear to us, but both to Asian American communities in those areas, but also to non-Asian American communities. And so, when I look at the path that Sanzo was on, and ultimately where I want to get to, is it's being the next global beverage that has authentic cultural heritage, behind it, and specifically for us, having that direct and authentic tie to our Asian and Asian American roots.
That's wonderful. That's terrific. Especially in the month of October is Filipino-American History Month.
It is.
So now you're making your mark
Yes.
to be part of that history of Asian American history in the United States.
Yes.
Terrific. I love that.
Thank you.
Now, this question comes from Eddie E. What made you transition from being a chemical engineer to an entrepreneur? What can you share for other potential young entrepreneurs, especially people of color, how to transition from being an employee to owning their own business? How to transition? All right.
Sure. So I guess I'll take that in two parts. So the first is the transition from being a chemical engineer to an entrepreneur. It is, I guess, not a super common path, but I almost don't see why it wouldn't be. I think the biggest thing that I learned was how to have a process around starting, I guess, forget about even a business, but creating a product that people either like or don't like, right? I mean, in the beginning days, a lot of what you're trying to do is just, get that initial, what we would call product market fit. And I felt like my engineering background was especially helpful in creating specifically a process around how we determine whether we're meeting that mark or whether we need to go back and try again. And I think ultimately, and I guess this gets to the second part of the question about the transition between being an employee and an entrepreneur. I really loved the idea of building. And I think that, whether you're an employee or whether you're in the, like the founder seat, I think you can be a builder regardless. I think my path happened to take me here, but but I also found that, hey, for 5 years, I was in a position where even as an employee, I was empowered to build alongside my founders. So that last step of really taking the leap was ultimately about conviction over the idea that I had. There is a big leap in that sense, and I guess a certain amount of risk. You are kind of, for me, put most of my life savings into starting the business and getting it off the ground.
Wait, did you say that you had savings and you used first your own money?
Oh yeah.
Okay, that is very important. He saved while he was working. All right, he's putting aside money. You were not going into Starbucks paying $5 or doing other things. You were saving.
I was.
Yes.
I was. I did put every bit of every dollar that I earned, especially in that last year when I was at my last company, was basically being put towards the business.
Did you take vacations to Europe, to Paris?
No.
Okay. So he had a dream, and to get to that dream, you need financing. And rather than asking people money, he saved. Okay, yes. I think that's the first step. If you want to be an entrepreneur, you save.
I would agree. I do think you need to do your own work in the beginning before you ask someone to invest in. And then, frankly, that entrepreneur also has to be all in. I don't think you can, at some point in time, you can't do it while still working a full-time job. And so it is a bit of a leap, and it's scary, but that's kind of the way it goes from my experience, what I've seen from entrepreneurs. And so I guess my message for other, prospective entrepreneurs of color is that, I think first off, I think the ecosystem has changed quite a bit over the last decade. Talked about the democratization of entrepreneurship. Anyone especially if you're in the world of like consumer brands, anyone with access to a phone, which is basically everyone these days, can start a brand. We have access to TikTok, to YouTube, Instagram. There's just in the last 2 years, I can name a dozen brands that have gotten off the ground in various parts of the United States, with their primary marketing and sales channel being TikTok. So I hope that can be a source of inspiration for folks. And then there's also, at that next stage, when you have that proof of concept, there's also now a new generation of entrepreneurs of color or investors of color that are starting to fund other folks in the community. So maybe my overall message would be, if you feel like you've got something interesting and you have the grit, the tenacity, and the conviction to go pursue it,
and your own finances first.
Yes, there is now is the time.
Okay, very good lesson. Thank you very much, Sandro. Okay, Carmen N. Okay. She wants to know this answer. I imagine starting and running a business is like having a child, in the sense that you have to handhold it until it's thriving and can stand on its own without you necessarily being there for every single thing. What is a typical day like you have, and how do you unwind?
Sure. So to the first point, I believe the analogy of starting a business to having a child is very appropriate. I in many ways think of the business as, through different life stages of, a baby to a toddler to an adolescent and whatnot. So I would very much agree with
Carmen.
with Carmen on that. To the other questions, I guess, what are my day-to-day like and how do I
As of now,
unwind?
yes.
Honestly,
Now that you are 6 years old, that the Sanzo is
Yeah.
6 years old.
I mean, it's I wouldn't say it's not different from the beginning. It's just a scaled up version of that. So what I do love about entrepreneurship and the opportunity that it gives me is that, I kind of think about the business in four main ways: sales, marketing, finance, and operations. And over the course...
Again, repeat that, please, for those who are listening very intently.
Sure.
Sales,
marketing, finance, and operations. And what I do love about the opportunity that I have to launch and scale this business is I actually really enjoy all four parts of the business equally. I mean, both. I enjoy that the finance and operations part has a certain level of organization to it, and I like that analytical side. I love that the marketing side, we can be more, that kind of taps into the creative side of my mind and the real people, part of it's the real people part of the business. And then sales is how we, grow the thing. Right. And so, it's whenever I get that question, it's always a hard one to ask because it really does vary. But it usually is, and it usually is some aspect of, hey, every day, or if I divide up my day into, half a day blocks, it's geared towards one of those four buckets.
Yes, that's a CEO, okay, of a startup. Now it's no longer. It's really no longer a startup. Let's say you're on teenage years. Yes. Okay, thank you for that question, Carmen. Now this is from Vivian V. With your level of success now being carried by mainstream groceries like Whole Foods and others in the West Coast and Midwest, the challenges that you've faced to get there, what do you say being an Asian or a Filipino-American have more advantages than disadvantages? Good question.
It is a good question. It's interesting. In the specific world that we're in, which is food and beverage, consumer goods, a lot of the key decision makers, whether they are retail buyers, so the people who decide what to put on the shelf, the distributors, so the people who sell to them, and even the manufacturers, the financiers, it's very trend focused. And so what I would say is in the beginning, 2018 through 2022, I would say that it was frankly probably a disadvantage. We would often be talked about as being niche. This will never break out. This is only interesting to a certain amount of folks. And so fighting through that was a lot. It has been a big challenge. I think if I'm being honest, over the last, I'd call it about a year to a year and a half or so, I think it's actually become a bit of an advantage because there are now multiple brands across different parts of the grocery store. So frozen foods, sauces, dried goods like pasta or noodles, things like that. And then us in beverage, who are seeing success. And so again, kind of going back to the idea that things are trend-based, we now have a couple more tailwinds, behind our back. And so, where I think there is still for sure a headwind is that, and this is true of any entrepreneur, we are still a tiny drop in the bucket, versus the larger conglomerates like Coca-Cola and PepsiCo and Unilever and Procter & Gamble. But we are starting to see just recently over the last couple of weeks, some real cracks in that ceiling. I'll point to specifically last week, there's a massive acquisition that happened between PepsiCo and Siete Family Foods, which is a Mexican-American started brand out of Texas, for $1.2 billion.
They bought it.
They bought it.
Oh my God.
And
here we go. We're facing a billionaire over here.
Well, it shows, I think, the real opportunity that if you kind of look at culture and demographics in the United States, the real power of the Latino community and how it's developed over a couple generations of immigrants to first gen, second gen, third gen, and what that is doing for the American palate, I think I'm so inspired by by that story, because it's showing in a real way that there's a redefining of what it means to be American in the 21st century. And I believe, obviously I'm very biased, but I believe that when we look up, 10, 20 years from now, we will be, if not sooner, we will be having the same conversation about Asian and Asian American culture. And I think that's just, we talk again about democratizing entrepreneurship, making it more inclusive, more representative of the American citizenry. I just get super excited about that idea.
Well, you're actually on data, because from 2010 to 2020, the census says that the fastest growing, 36% growth, is the AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander.
Yes.
So you're right there on that trend. Very good.
Thank you.
So the other question we see from Dan E. Who would you say is the person that you looked up to growing up, inspired you to go on the path that you took? If there's any.
It's interesting. As you asked that, I'm not even sure that I have a specific, I want to be like this person. But I would probably say just as you asked that question, the thing that I reflected most on was truly a sense of gratitude that I have to my parents for immigrating here, for having me here. My entire experience is that of being an American. I'm born here. This is the only thing that I really know, and a lot of privileges that come with that. And one of the positives, I suppose, is a level of delusion that I can just drop everything and start a business.
It's not a delusion. That's the American dream.
It's the American dream, right?
It's the American dream.
And so ultimately, I think when I just think about growing up, the sacrifices that my parents made to give my brothers and me that opportunity to pursue whatever it is that we wanted, that's to me more an example than any, CEO or billionaire or any business person that was there at the time.
Okay. Well, with the help of Laura, my producer, we have a sample of Sanzo with the calamansi, and it's called yuzu with ginger, sparkling water. All right. No alcohol. And this is the first most light drink, lychee, sparkling water, Sanzo.
Do you drink carbonated drinks? I know you're drinking water before. If you don't like carbonated drinks, that's okay.
No. I do drink Perrier.
Okay, cool.
All right. And every now and then in a restaurant, Pellegrino.
Okay. So you might
that's
like
it.
I think you might like our yuzu thing. Especially since you drink your water with lemon, I think that's actually a good one for you.
Yes, I do drink water
Great.
with lemon.
Great.
All right. Can I try it now?
Sure. So as you're drinking, I'll explain it to you.
Okay.
Okay, that's a good sound.
That's a good sound.
So this is Sanzo. Yes, these are our two most popular flavors. Right now, you're drinking our Japanese yuzu, which is a type of lemony citrus flavor, made with real fruit, no calories, no added sugar. It's meant to just be very, very light.
That's so good. It is so good. And it's got ginger, which is good for health.
Yes.
And it's made from real fruit, which is limonada. Is it calamansi?
This one is just the yuzu, which is the Japanese lemon. But I guess if you were kind of to compare it to like a calamansi juice,
Yes.
what we've essentially done is remove the sugar, add bubbles.
I see. Okay, very good. It's excellent. I like it.
Thank you.
So everyone, go to the supermarket now, or your regular bodega, or your whatever is close by to you. Sanzo, a sparkling drink without alcohol. Very healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you. So there you have it. Sanzo drink with Sandro Roco, the creator and CEO of Sanzo. Thank you for listening. This is Loida Lewis Podcast. Let's live, love, laugh, and learn together.
the Loida Lewis Podcast, hosted by Loida Lewis, is produced by the creators of Over a Glass or Two, Jesse and JV, executive produced by Laura Nicholas Olace. Rate and review us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for a chance to be featured on a future episode. Have a question for Miss Loida? Just email us on askloidalewis@gmail.com. Your question might make its way to a future episode. Subscribe on all major platforms to never miss a beat. Thank you for listening to the Loida Lewis Podcast. Let's live, love, laugh, and learn together